The Texas highway stretched endlessly, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. Dust swirled in the crisp autumn air as a sleek black sedan sputtered, coughed, and came to an abrupt stop on the roadside. The engine had breathed its last. Inside the car, Olivia Carter let out a frustrated sigh. She had built a business empire with nothing but sheer determination, and now, of all times, she found herself stranded. This wasn't supposed to happen, not to her, not now. She reached for her phone. No signal, of course. Stepping onto the quiet road, Olivia scanned the horizon. The only sign of civilization was a small garage in the distance, its neon sign flickering against the twilight. With no other options, she started walking, unaware that this breakdown wasn't just about her car. It was about her life. And at the end of that road, in the shadows of an old garage, was a man who would change everything she thought she knew about love, home, and what truly mattered. If you've ever wondered whether one small act of kindness could change the course of a life, then this story is for you. It's not just a love story. It's a tale of second chances, unexpected connections, and finding home in the last place you'd expect. So if you love stories that warm your heart, make you believe in love again, and remind you that the best things in life often come when we least expect them, stick around. Now, let's begin. The Texas sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the winding roads of Willow Creek. Nestled between rolling fields and oak-lined highways, the town was the kind of place where people still waved at strangers, and neighbors always had each other's backs. At the heart of it all was Ben Lawson, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. He leaned against the hood of a truck parked in front of his small auto repair shop, the same shop that had been his lifeline for the last 6 years. Ever since his wife passed, he had left behind a promising engineering career to raise his 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. Life had never been easy, but there was a certain peace in routine, in hard work, in Sophie's laughter echoing through the shop. A low hum in the distance pulled him from his thoughts. A black sedan limped toward the garage, its engine stuttering before giving up entirely. A woman climbed out, clearly frustrated. She was striking, tall, with chestnut-brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She had the air of someone important, someone used to having control. And yet there was something restless about her, like she didn't quite belong here, or anywhere. She pulled out her phone and frowned. No service. Great, she muttered, before glancing around. Spotting Ben, she took a breath and walked toward him, her pristine sneakers crunching against the gravel. "Excuse me," she called, polite but firm. "My car broke down, and I don't have any signal. Do you have a tow truck?" Ben arched a brow, taking in the expensive car, the impatience in her tone, and the way she carried herself. City girl. No doubt about it. "Lucky for you, you broke down in the right place," he said, grabbing a clean rag. "Pop the hood. Let's take a look." She hesitated but nodded, pressing the button to release the latch. Ben peered inside. Fuel pump failure. Nothing she could fix on her own. "Your fuel pump's shot," he said after a moment. "I can fix it, but I don't have the part in stock. I'll need to order it. Best case, you'll be back on the road tomorrow afternoon." The woman exhaled sharply, clearly unhappy with the delay. "You're sure there's no quicker fix?" Ben straightened, smirking. "Unless you've got a magic wand, I'm afraid not." For the first time she laughed, a real laugh, tired but genuine. "I should have known better than to drive across Texas alone. Yeah, we don't take kindly to fancy city cars that can't handle a little dust, he teased, his smirk growing. She folded her arms, intrigued. And how do you know I'm from the city? Ben nodded toward her spotless white sneakers. No one in Willow Creek wears shoes that clean. She shook her head, smiling. You're not wrong. Extending a hand, she introduced herself. Olivia Carter. Ben Lawson. His handshake was firm, steady. Welcome to Willow Creek. Population small enough that you'll hear the latest gossip before you even meet half the town. With no choice but to wait for her car to be repaired, Olivia found herself stranded in a town she had never even heard of. She was used to schedules dictated by meetings, deadlines, and high-stakes business decisions. But here, time stretched out before her, unhurried, unfamiliar. Her options limited, she wandered into Frank's Diner, a cozy place with red leather booths and the rich scent of fresh coffee filling the air. A burly man with kind eyes and a well-worn apron greeted her the moment she stepped inside. Well now, you must be the tourist who broke down, he said with a knowing smile. Olivia blinked. How did you? He chuckled, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. Ben called ahead. Figured you might be looking for a place to eat. A strange warmth settled in Olivia's chest. She wasn't used to strangers looking out for her, not without some ulterior motive. Taking a seat by the window, she glanced outside. Across the street, Ben stood in front of his garage talking to a young girl, his daughter, Sophie. The little girl spoke animatedly, hands waving as she told a story. Ben, despite looking exhausted, listened attentively, nodding at the right moments, chuckling at her enthusiasm. Something about the scene stirred something deep in Olivia. That afternoon, she returned to the garage to check on her car. Ben was under the hood, sleeves rolled up, grease smudging his arms. Sophie sat nearby, swinging her legs as she read a book. "You're back already?" Ben asked, arching a brow. "Didn't have much else to do?" Olivia leaned against the doorway, smirking. "So, is this the part where you overcharge me for parts I don't need?" Ben chuckled. "That's not how we do things here, Carter." She tilted her head. "Then why are you fixing my car for free?" Ben held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing, and they didn't ask for anything in return." His words lingered, heavier than she expected. For the first time in a long time, Olivia found herself at a loss for words. As the sun set over Willow Creek, she realized something unexpected. This town, this quiet, simple place, felt good. And Ben Lawson? He was unlike anyone she had ever met. What she didn't know was that this short stop in Willow Creek was about to change her life forever. That morning in Willow Creek felt different. The sun cast a soft golden light over the quiet town, the crisp air carrying the scent of fresh-baked bread from Frank's Diner. For the first time in a long while, Emma Sinclair wasn't defined by her wealth, her title, or the power she held in boardrooms. Here, none of it mattered. And oddly enough, she didn't mind. She had barely taken a sip of her coffee when the diner door swung open, and in skipped Lily Harrison, her ponytail bouncing, a backpack slung over her shoulder. "Emma!" The little girl's voice was bright with excitement. "You're still here." Emma blinked at the warm greeting. "Well, my car's still broken, so I guess I'm stuck a little longer." Lily grinned. "That means you can come to the fall festival tonight." Emma hesitated. "The fall festival?" Frank, who had been refilling coffee at the counter, chuckled. "Biggest event of the season. Bonfire, live music, homemade pies, whole town shows up." Lily clasped her hands together. "Please, it's really fun. And Daddy never goes. Maybe you can convince him?" Emma smirked. "Oh? Why doesn't he go?" Frank leaned in, lowering his voice. Jack Harrison's not much for socializing. Ever since his wife passed, he's kept to himself. Hard worker, great father, but he doesn't take time for himself. Emma glanced out the window. Across the street, Jack was at his garage, sleeves rolled up, focused as always. Even from here, she could see the tension in his posture, the weight he carried like an old, familiar burden. Without thinking, she found herself saying, "I'll see what I can do." That afternoon, Emma strolled across the road to Harrison's auto repair. Jack was under the hood of her car, completely engrossed in his work. "So," she said, arms crossed, leaning against the doorway, "you're avoiding the fall festival." Jack glanced up, raising a brow. "Did Lily put you up to this?" "Maybe," Emma admitted with a grin. "But it's a small town, and I have nothing better to do. So let's make a deal. If you go, I'll go." Jack wiped his hands on a rag, shaking his head. "That's not much of a bargain for me." "Oh, come on," she teased, stepping closer. "You work too much. One night won't kill you." He studied her for a moment before sighing. "Fine, but don't expect me to dance." Emma grinned. "Deal." The fall festival was more than Emma had expected. String lights twinkled between the oak trees. The scent of cinnamon and roasted marshmallows filled the air, and a live band played old country songs. Jack arrived with Lily in tow, the little girl immediately running off to join her friends. Emma, dressed in a cozy sweater and jeans, stood beside Jack. "Admit it," she said, nudging him. "This isn't the worst way to spend an evening." Jack smirked, glancing around. "Not the worst." As they wandered through the festival, people greeted Jack with warmth, their familiarity a reminder that he was more than just the town's mechanic. He was someone they respected, someone they cared for. They stopped at a booth where an elderly woman was selling caramel apples. "Well, Jack Harrison," she teased, "you finally crawled out of that garage of yours." Jack chuckled. "Figured I'd give the town something to talk about." Emma smiled as she watched him interact with the townspeople. He belonged here. There was an ease to the way he spoke, a quiet strength in how people naturally gravitated toward him. And for the first time, she wondered, what would it feel like to belong somewhere like this? As the night wound down, Emma and Jack found themselves near the bonfire, its warmth flickering against the cool autumn air. "So, city girl," Jack said, glancing at her, "what exactly were you running from when you ended up here?" Emma hesitated. No one had ever asked her that, not with real curiosity. She exhaled. "My life, or maybe just the version of it I thought I wanted." Jack nodded, as if he understood all too well. "And what about you?" she asked. "Why did you leave your old life behind?" His jaw tightened slightly before he sighed. "Because when I lost my wife, I realized I couldn't fix what was broken, but I could build something new for Lily." Emma's chest tightened. There it was, the quiet pain beneath his strength. "You're a good father," she said softly, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. Jack glanced at her, something unspoken flickering in his gaze. "And you're not as lost as you think you are." For the first time in a long time, Emma believed him. Just then, Lily appeared, grabbing Jack's hand. "Daddy, dance with Emma!" Jack looked caught off guard. Come on," Emma teased, holding out her hand. "You did promise." With a reluctant sigh, Jack took her hand, leading her onto the makeshift dance floor. As they swayed under the string lights, something shifted between them, something neither of them were ready to name. Emma wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, wrapped in Jack Harrison's steady arms, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready to leave Willow Creek just yet. She felt herself sinking deeper into the rhythm of Willow Creek, into a life that wasn't hers but felt like it could be. And that terrified her more than anything. By late afternoon, the part for Emma's car had arrived. Jack worked in focused silence, replacing the fuel pump with practiced ease. Emma stood nearby, watching him, feeling a strange heaviness settle in her chest. "So, this is it, huh?" she said softly. Jack tightened the last bolt before straightening up, his gaze meeting hers. "Looks like it." From the sidelines, Lily had been listening intently. Suddenly, she jumped down from the workbench and ran toward Emma, throwing her arms around her. "You can't leave yet," the little girl protested, squeezing her tightly. "We haven't even gone to the lake or seen the fireflies." Emma's heart clenched. She hugged Lily back, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I know, sweetheart, but I have to go." Lily pulled back, her big brown eyes searching Emma's face. "Will you ever come back?" Emma opened her mouth, but no words came. Because the truth was, she didn't know. As she climbed into the driver's seat, she hesitated, her fingers resting on the key. Jack leaned against the garage doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Say something," she silently pleaded. "Give me a reason to stay." But he didn't. So, with a heavy heart, she started the engine. Just as she was about to pull away, Jack finally spoke. "Emma." She froze, looking up at him. His jaw tightened slightly. "You ever think that maybe you don't have to go back?" Her breath caught. Jack wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, he meant every single one. She swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. "I have a life there, Jack." His gaze didn't waver. "Maybe. But do you have a home?" The words hit her like a punch to the chest, because deep down, she already knew the answer. She drove away from Willow Creek that evening, watching the town shrink in her rearview mirror. And yet, with every passing mile, a single terrifying thought settled deep inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she was heading in the right direction. The highway stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields bathed in golden hues under the setting sun. The engine purred smoothly. Jack had fixed her car perfectly. And yet Emma Sinclair had never felt more lost. She had spent years mastering the art of decisiveness. In boardrooms, her word was law. She never hesitated, never second-guessed herself. But now, every mile between her and Willow Creek felt like a mistake. Jack's words echoed in her mind. Maybe. "But do you have a home?" She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her heart pounding against her ribs. This was ridiculous. She had an empire waiting for her in New York, a life built on ambition, sacrifice, and relentless pursuit of success. And yet, she had never felt as grounded, as seen, as at peace as she had in that small town, with a mechanic who barely spoke, but somehow understood her better than anyone ever had. With a sigh, she pulled into a quiet rest stop and shut off the engine. The air was crisp, the stars just beginning to flicker to life in the darkening sky. Leaning against the car, Emma closed her eyes, letting the silence settle around her. She wasn't ready to go back, but she wasn't sure she had the courage to turn around either. By the time she reached New York the next afternoon, the city greeted her with its usual chaos. Honking taxis, flashing billboards, and streets overflowing with people moving at an unforgiving pace. The moment she stepped into her penthouse, something felt off. The sleek furniture, the spotless marble countertops, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Everything was exactly as she had left it, and yet it felt hollow. She dropped her suitcase by the door, exhaustion weighing on her limbs. Her phone rang almost immediately. Margaret Sinclair. Emma sighed before answering. "Where have you been?" Her mother's voice was sharp, controlled. "I've had to field questions from investors all week. You can't just disappear." Emma rubbed her temple. "I needed a break, Mother." A scoff. "A break?" "Emma, people like us don't get breaks. You have responsibilities." That word had once defined her. Now it felt like a chain. Emma exhaled slowly. "Did you need something?" "I scheduled a dinner with the Harrison group tonight. They're expecting you." Of course they were. Emma wanted to protest. She wanted to say no, to tell her mother that she was exhausted, that she needed time. Instead, she fell into the familiar pattern. "I'll be there." The restaurant was exclusive, sophisticated, soulless. The evening passed in a blur of corporate small talk, polished smiles, and the ever-present weight of expectations that had ruled Emma's life for as long as she could remember. She barely touched her meal. Her mind kept drifting back to Willow Creek, to warm coffee at Frank's diner, to the sound of Lily's laughter, to the quiet steadiness of Jack Harrison. She had thought that distance would bring clarity. Instead, it only made her realize how much she had left behind. A voice pulled her back. "Emma." She blinked, realizing Jeremy Harrison, heir to a powerful investment firm, was watching her expectantly. "I was just saying," he continued, flashing a smooth smile, "you and I should do this more often. It's been a while since we caught up." Emma's stomach twisted. Once, this was the world she thought she belonged to. Powerful men in tailored suits, deals made over expensive wine, relationships built on convenience and strategy. But now? Now, she wanted grease-stained hands and quiet conversations under the stars. She wanted laughter that wasn't rehearsed, moments that weren't calculated. She wanted real. And nothing in this room felt real anymore. Later that night, Emma stood on her penthouse balcony, staring out at the endless city lights. This was supposed to be enough. She had spent her entire life working to get here, so why did she feel so empty? A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find her assistant, Clara, holding a stack of mail. "These came for you." Emma took them absent-mindedly, flipping through bills, invitations, corporate notices, until her fingers froze on a small, handwritten envelope. The return address read, Willow Creek. Her breath caught. Slowly, she tore it open, hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was small, a little uneven. "Dear Emma, Daddy says you're busy, and I know you have a big important job, but I wanted to tell you something. I miss you. I miss the way you tell stories and help me with my math homework. I miss how you made Daddy laugh. He doesn't laugh a lot, you know. I told him he should have asked you to stay, but he's stubborn, so maybe I'm asking for both of us. Come back soon, okay? Love." Lily Emma pressed a hand to her mouth, her chest tightening. She could feel the weight of every word, the quiet plea of a little girl who had unknowingly put into words what Emma had been too afraid to admit to herself. She didn't belong in New York anymore. She belonged in Willow Creek, with Jack, with Lily, with the life she had been too afraid to claim. By dawn, Emma was on the road again, her suitcase barely touched, her heart racing. This time she wasn't running away. She was going home. The highway stretched ahead, familiar yet different. This time she wasn't leaving something behind. She was moving toward something, toward Willow Creek, toward Jack Harrison, toward a life she had never planned for, but somehow knew deep in her soul was meant to be hers. The past few days in New York had felt like an illusion, polished, structured, but ultimately empty. She had gone through the motions, attended meetings, smiled at all the right people, but her heart had been 1,000 miles away. It wasn't just the town she missed. It was the people. Lily's laughter, the smell of coffee at Frank's diner, the way Jack looked at her, not as a powerful CEO, but simply as her. Now she was going back. The only question that haunted her was whether Jack still wanted her to. By the time she pulled into Willow Creek, the sun was setting, bathing the town in a golden glow. It looked the same as when she had left, yet everything felt different, because this time she wasn't just passing through. This time she was choosing to be here. She parked outside Harrison's Auto Repair, her heart pounding as she stepped out of the car. The garage doors were open, and Jack was inside, working on a truck, his back to her. His broad shoulders were tense with focus. For a moment, she hesitated. What if she had imagined everything between them? What if he didn't want her back? But then she thought of Lily's letter. Come back soon, okay? Steadying herself, she took a breath and walked forward. Hey, stranger! Jack froze mid-motion, the wrench in his hand still gripping a bolt. Slowly, he turned around, his stormy blue eyes locking onto hers. For a long moment, he said nothing. Emma braced herself for indifference, but then she saw it. The flicker of something softer in his gaze. He hadn't expected to see her again, but he wasn't angry, just cautious. You came back. She swallowed and nodded. Yeah, I did. Jack set the wrench down, wiping his hands on a rag. He studied her, his expression unreadable. New York didn't work out? His tone was neutral, careful. Emma exhaled. New York is what I built for myself, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. Something flickered in his eyes, but he stayed silent. She took another step closer. I read Lily's letter. Jack's jaw tightened slightly. He let out a slow breath. I didn't know she sent it. I know, but I'm glad she did. Emma smiled softly, because it made me realize something. She hesitated, her heart pounding. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I was scared. Jack's brows furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I was scared of what this meant, of what I felt, of how easy it was to be here when it shouldn't have been. She took a shaky breath. But I don't want to be scared anymore. A silence stretched between them. Jack exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Emma. His voice was rough, conflicted. She knew that tone. He wanted to believe her, but he wasn't sure if he could, and she couldn't blame him for that. So she simply said, Tell me I'm too late, and I'll leave. I swear. Another pause. Jack searched her eyes, looking for something. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. You're not too late. He looked exhausted, like he had spent the past few days wrestling with something inside himself. Maybe he had. Lily's been waiting for you, he admitted. She kept asking if you'd come back. I told her not to get her hopes up. Emma's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Jack exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know how to do this, Emma. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Neither do I. He huffed out a quiet laugh. Well, that's reassuring. Emma smiled. I don't have all the answers, Jack. But I know one thing. I don't want to be anywhere but here. He studied her again, and this time, the walls he had been holding up started to crumble. Then finally, he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. It was hesitant. It was uncertain. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was exactly where she belonged. That night, the moment Emma walked through the door, Lily tackled her in a hug. I knew you'd come back, she squealed. Emma laughed, holding her tight. I missed you, kiddo. From the doorway, Jack watched them, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long moment, he simply said, "Stay for dinner." It wasn't just an invitation. It was a beginning. The warm scent of homemade chili and cornbread filled the kitchen, blending with the low hum of a country song playing softly from an old radio by the window. Jack's house was modest but welcoming, filled with well-loved furniture, framed photos of Lily, and a sense of comfort that Emma hadn't realized she missed until now. She sat at the kitchen table watching as Jack moved around the stove with ease, stirring a pot with one hand, balancing a wooden spoon in the other. Lily, sitting across from Emma, kicked her legs happily. "Daddy's chili is the best. You're gonna love it." Emma smirked. "I don't doubt it." Jack shot her a look over his shoulder, a flicker of amusement in his usually serious expression. "Don't let her hype it up too much. It's just chili." Lily gasped, scandalized. "Just chili? Daddy, that's offensive to all the chili in the world." Emma chuckled, leaning back in her chair. This felt natural, like she belonged here in this kitchen with these people who had somehow become home. But reality had a way of creeping back in. She had nowhere to stay, no plan. After dinner, as Lily helped clear the table, Jack leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So, where are you staying?" His voice was calm, but there was something careful about the way he asked. Emma hesitated. "I haven't figured that out yet." Jack exhaled through his nose, setting his plate in the sink. "I figured." Before she could say anything else, Lily bounced back into the room. "Emma can stay in the guest room," she declared, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. Emma blinked. "Oh, I don't—" Jack's voice was quiet but firm. "That's not our decision to make." Lily frowned. "But she doesn't have anywhere else." She turned to Emma, her big brown eyes pleading. "You said you weren't ready to leave yet, right?" Emma's heart clenched. She had meant those words, but she hadn't expected to be invited into their lives so quickly. Jack was watching her now, waiting for her reaction. Say yes. The thought startled her, but it was true. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to stay in some motel, alone with her thoughts, pretending she wasn't longing for the warmth of this place, this family. She swallowed hard before speaking. "I don't want to be a burden." Jack's gaze flickered. "You wouldn't be." And just like that, the decision was made. She was staying. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jack led Emma to the small but inviting guest room. The bed was simple yet comfortable, draped with soft blankets. In the corner sat an old rocking chair, its worn edges hinting at years of use. Through the window, the backyard stretched into the darkness, fireflies flickering like tiny stars. Emma hesitated in the doorway before turning to Jack. "Are you sure about this?" Leaning against the doorframe, his expression unreadable, he replied, "If I wasn't, I wouldn't have offered." She nodded, biting her lip. "I don't know how long I'll be here." Jack studied her for a moment before speaking, his voice steady. "Then we'll figure it out, one day at a time." There was something in the way he said it. Calm, reassuring. He wasn't afraid of the unknown, unlike her. Emma exhaled, offering a small smile. "Thank you, Jack." He gave a single nod before stepping back. "Get some rest, Sinclair." As the door clicked shut behind him, she leaned against it, heart pounding. One day at a time, she could do that. Maybe for the first time in her life, she didn't need to have every step planned out. The next morning, Emma woke to the soft chirping of birds outside her window, a far cry from the honking taxis and constant hum of construction in New York. For a moment, she simply lay there, absorbing the quiet. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Emma? Lily's small voice called through the door. Emma sat up. Come in. The door creaked open, and Lily peeked in, a book clutched to her chest. Daddy left early for work. He said you could come by later. Emma smiled. And shouldn't you be getting ready for school? Lily hesitated before stepping inside. I thought maybe we could read first. Emma blinked in surprise. She wanted to read with her. Warmth spread through her chest. She was becoming part of Lily's world. And maybe, just maybe, she was becoming part of Jack's, too. Later that morning, Emma found herself back at Harrison's auto repair, watching Jack work beneath a lifted truck. Leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, she smirked. You're up early. Jack wiped his hands on a rag before glancing at her. Habit. Emma inhaled deeply, gathering her courage. Can I ask you something? He set the rag down, giving her his full attention. Shoot. She hesitated. Why did you let me stay? Jack studied her for a long moment before answering. Because Lily wanted you here. Her heart sank, but before she could respond, he added, and because I didn't want you to leave either. Silence stretched between them. This time there was no running, no excuses. Emma nodded slowly, a small smile playing at her lips. One day at a time? Jack huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, one day at a time. But deep down, they both knew this wasn't just temporary anymore. The late afternoon sun cast golden light over Willow Creek, stretching long shadows across the quiet town. The days were growing shorter, the air cooler, autumn settling in, gentle but firm, much like the changes taking root in Emma Sinclair's life. She hadn't planned to stay this long, but every morning, waking to Lily's laughter, to the smell of coffee brewing in Jack's kitchen, to the easy rhythm of this town, the thought of leaving felt impossible. And Jack. He was still cautious, still the steady, reserved man she had met weeks ago. But something had shifted. Something neither of them dared to name. That evening, Emma sat on the porch swing, wrapped in one of Jack's flannel blankets. Through the open window, Lily's soft, even breathing filtered into the night. Jack stepped onto the porch, 2 mugs in hand. Figured you might want one. Emma took the coffee with a small smile. Thanks. He leaned against the railing, gazing out at the dark horizon. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with something unspoken, fragile, yet growing stronger. Tracing the rim of her mug, Emma finally spoke. You don't talk much about her? Jack didn't have to ask who she meant. He let out a slow breath. Lily's mom. Emma nodded. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, her name was Rachel. Emma stayed silent, letting him decide how much to share. We met in high school, got married young. She was the best person I ever knew. A pause. Then, cancer took her. Emma's chest tightened. I'm so sorry, Jack. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars. After she passed, I had 2 choices, break apart or build something for Lily. So I stayed, I worked, I did what I could to keep things steady. He exhaled, but I stopped letting people in. Emma swallowed hard, her heart aching for him. Jack turned then, meeting her gaze. And then you showed up. She stilled. Lily's laughing more. The house feels less empty. And He broke off, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know what to do with that. Emma set her coffee down and stood. Maybe you don't have to do anything. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe fear, definitely uncertainty. She stepped closer. You don't have to have all the answers, Jack. His jaw clenched. And what about you? Emma swallowed. I don't know either. A beat of silence. Then, finally, Jack nodded. One day at a time. Emma exhaled, a slow smile forming. One day at a time. The next morning, Emma stood in the garage at Harrison's Auto Repair, gripping a wrench with more uncertainty than she cared to admit. Frank leaned against the workbench, watching her with amusement. "You sure you want to do this, Sinclair?" Emma rolled her eyes. "I can handle a wrench." "We'll see that." Jack smirked from across the hood of a pickup truck. "All right, city girl, let's see what you've got." She narrowed her eyes at him before turning to the engine. She had spent years running a billion-dollar company, making million-dollar decisions. But this was different, and she loved it. By the time she had grease smudged across her cheek and a sore wrist from wrestling with a stubborn bolt, she was laughing, real, unrestrained laughter. Jack leaned against the truck, watching her with something close to admiration. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like a woman out of place. She felt like she belonged. That evening, storm clouds rolled in over Willow Creek, heavy with rain. The first rumble of thunder echoed through the sky as the downpour began, relentless and cold. Emma was curled up on the couch, lost in a book, when... Crack. The power went out. Lily let out a startled gasp. "Daddy?" Jack was already grabbing a flashlight. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just the storm." Emma stood, instinctively reaching for Lily's hand. "Is there anything we need to do?" Jack shook his head. "Shouldn't last long, but I should check the generator in the garage. I'll come with you." Outside, rain pounded against the metal roof of the garage as Jack muttered under his breath, adjusting the generator. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Emma teased. Jack shot her a look. "This coming from the woman who took 20 minutes to unscrew a single bolt this morning?" Emma gasped. "It was stuck." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. Then, as the laughter faded, he turned to her fully. The storm raged around them, but suddenly, it didn't matter, because he was looking at her, really looking at her, and in that moment, Emma knew something had changed. Jack reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from Emma's face. His touch was light but intentional, sending a shiver down her spine. "Emma," he murmured, his voice low and rough. She swallowed. "Yeah." A long pause. Then, in the softest whisper, "Tell me you're staying." Her chest tightened because she knew this was it, the moment, the choice. And this time, she didn't hesitate. "I'm staying." Jack exhaled, relief washing over his face, and before she could say another word, he kissed her. Outside, the rain poured, thunder rolled, but none of it mattered, because in that moment, Emma was finally home. The morning after the storm, Willow Creek glowed in the soft, rain-washed light. The air was crisp, the streets still damp, but the sky stretched clear and blue. Everything felt different, especially for Emma Sinclair. Because last night, she had kissed Jack Harrison. Or rather, he had kissed her, and she had kissed him back, without hesitation, without doubt. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a shift in something unspoken. Now, as she stood in the kitchen making coffee, she could still feel the warmth of his hands on her skin, the way he had looked at her, like she was something he didn't want to let go of. And that terrified her, because Jack wasn't the kind of man who took risks with his heart. And Emma wasn't the kind of woman who let herself fall. A few minutes later, Jack walked into the kitchen, freshly showered, his damp hair tousled. He moved with that same quiet steadiness, the same careful energy that had always defined him. But this time, when their eyes met, something had changed. There was no hesitation, no walls, just acceptance. Leaning against the counter, he crossed his arms. "Morning." Emma smirked. Morning. A pause. Then, with the faintest hint of amusement, he said, So, about last night. Her breath caught. She set her coffee down, meeting his gaze. Are you regretting it? Jack's brows pulled together. No. His voice was firm, unwavering. Not for a second. Relief flooded through her, but Jack hesitated. I need to know what this means for you, Emma. Because Lily, she already loves you. And I can't. He exhaled sharply. I can't let her get hurt. Emma swallowed, her throat tight. She understood. Jack wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting his daughter, his home, the life he had built from the ashes of his past. And she needed to show him that this wasn't temporary. Stepping closer, she reached for his hand. I'm not going anywhere, Jack. He studied her, searching for any trace of uncertainty. And when he didn't find one, he let out a breath, his fingers tightening around hers. Okay, just one word. But it was enough. By midday, the entire town knew. It started with Frank at the diner, who noticed the way Jack looked at Emma over breakfast. Then it spread to Mrs. Henderson at the farmer's market, who caught Emma smiling to herself while picking out apples. By afternoon, the news had traveled through every street and shop in Willow Creek. And of course, everyone had something to say about it. Took him long enough? I told you that city girl was different. Jack Harrison actually smiling? Someone write this down. Emma pretended to be annoyed, but deep down, she liked it. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just passing through. She was Emma Sinclair, the woman Jack Harrison had fallen for, and she never wanted to leave. That evening, as Emma helped Lily with a school project at the kitchen table, her phone rang. She almost ignored it. But then she saw the caller ID, Margaret Sinclair. Her stomach dropped. Stepping outside, she pressed the phone to her ear. Hello, Mother. Her mother's voice was as cool and precise as ever. I assume you've had your fun. Emma stiffened. What do you want? To remind you that you have a company to run. Investors are getting nervous. You can't just disappear, Emma. Her jaw clenched. I didn't disappear. I made a choice. A sharp scoff. A choice to play house in some nowhere town with a mechanic? Rage flared in Emma's chest. His name is Jack. Silence. Then her mother's voice turned almost pitying. And what happens when this little fantasy fades? You belong here, Emma. You're not meant for that kind of life. Her hands trembled. Because a small part of her, the part shaped by years of conditioning, wondered if her mother was right. Could she really stay? Could she walk away from everything she had built? She didn't know. And that terrified her. That night, Emma sat on the porch, staring at the sky. She didn't hear Jack approach until he was right beside her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. He handed her one, then sat down. You okay? She hesitated. My mother called. Jack's jaw tensed. Let me guess, she thinks you should go back. Emma exhaled, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. She thinks I don't belong here. Silence stretched between them. Then Jack spoke, soft, steady. Do you? Emma turned to look at him. His blue eyes were unreadable, but beneath them was something unspoken, something cautious, something afraid. Because if her answer was no, he wouldn't just lose her. Her heart ached. She set her coffee down, then reached for his hand. I don't know what my future looks like, Jack. His jaw clenched, but he didn't pull away. But I know one thing for sure, she whispered. I don't want a life without you in it. Jack exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Then, lifting her hand, he pressed a slow, lingering kiss to her knuckles. Then we'll figure it out, he murmured. His voice was quiet, but firm. Together. Emma nodded, and for the first time, she truly believed it. The days in Willow Creek settled into an easy rhythm, one Emma Sinclair never expected to crave, but now couldn't imagine living without. Mornings with Lily at the breakfast table, Jack's quiet glances across the kitchen, the steady hum of life in a town that had embraced her as one of their own. She no longer thought about deadlines and stock prices. Instead, she thought about helping Frank organize the fall fundraiser, about keeping up with Lily's endless curiosity, about the small, meaningful gestures Jack made every day. She was happy. For the first time in her life, she was truly, deeply happy. But happiness, she knew, had a way of being tested, and the test was coming. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Emma was at Harrison's Auto Repair, perched in the passenger seat of a truck Jack was fixing, flipping through a local newspaper. The morning had been filled with laughter, teasing Jack about the oil stains on his shirt, learning how to replace a tire properly. It was ordinary, simple, perfect. Then, the bell above the garage door jingled, and everything changed. Jack straightened, wiping the grease from his hands. "Be right with you," he called out. But Emma froze. She recognized the voice that followed. "That won't be necessary." Turning slowly, she saw Margaret Sinclair standing in the doorway, immaculate, poised, and completely out of place in the garage. Jack's eyes flicked to Emma, instantly sensing the tension thickening the air. Margaret's gaze swept the garage, her expression laced with thinly veiled disdain, before settling on Emma. "You've had your fun, darling. Now it's time to come home." Emma stepped off the truck, forcing her hands to stay steady. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Margaret sighed, as if this were an exhausting ordeal for her. "I gave you time, Emma, but now the board is growing restless. We need you back." Emma's heart pounded. She had known this moment would come, just not so soon. Jack stood beside her, silent but unwavering. Margaret crossed her arms. "You belong in New York, not here, playing house with a mechanic." Emma's jaw tightened. "Do not disrespect him." Margaret arched a brow. "I'm not. I'm simply stating the truth. You're wasting your time here." Jack's posture stiffened, but he remained silent, letting Emma fight her own battle. And she did. This was it, the final test. Did she belong in the world she had built, or the one she was building here? Margaret exhaled, shifting tactics. "Emma, you've worked too hard to throw it all away for—" She gestured vaguely around her. "This?" Emma shook her head. "You don't get it." Margaret's gaze softened, just slightly. "Then explain it to me." Emma inhaled sharply. "For years, I thought success meant power, control, always pushing for the next deal, the next goal. I thought that was happiness. But then I came here, and I realized I was wrong." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You don't belong here." Emma's voice didn't waver. "Then why does it feel like home?" Silence stretched between them. Margaret looked at her daughter as if she no longer recognized her. Emma's chest ached, but she stood her ground. "I'm not going back, Mother." The words were final, irreversible. Margaret exhaled sharply. "You'll regret this." Emma lifted her chin. For the first time, I won't." Without another word, Margaret turned and walked away. And just like that, Emma was free. As soon as Margaret's car disappeared down the road, Emma let out a shaky breath. Jack finally spoke. "Are you okay?" Emma turned to him, her heart still pounding. "I'd just walked away from everything I built." A long pause, then Jack said, "No, you walked toward something better." Emma's chest tightened, because deep down she knew he was right. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, Lily looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity. "So, does this mean you're really staying?" Emma met Jack's gaze across the table, a silent conversation passing between them. Then she smiled at Lily. "Yeah, kiddo, I'm really staying." Lily grinned, throwing her arms in the air. "Best day ever." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. And Emma, she felt lighter than she had in years. Later that night, as she stood outside on the porch, staring at the endless stars, Jack stepped beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just stood close enough that their arms brushed. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "You sure about this?" Emma turned to him. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Jack's eyes searched hers, and after a long moment, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. And for the first time in a long time, Emma Sinclair wasn't afraid of what came next. Because this time, she wasn't walking away from something. She was walking toward it. Toward him. Toward home. The soft hum of morning in Willow Creek was something Emma had come to love. The way the sunlight spilled over the rolling fields, the distant sound of a rooster crowing from a nearby farm, the quiet laughter of Lily Harrison twirling in the golden glow of dawn. For the first time in years, Emma felt something she never thought she'd have. Peace. Not the kind that came from winning deals, climbing ranks, or proving herself in a boardroom, but the kind that came from knowing, without a doubt, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Jack stood in the kitchen, his back to her as he poured 2 mugs of coffee. Emma leaned against the doorway, watching him. She had spent years surrounded by men in suits, men who wore ambition like armor. But this man wore work-worn hands, quiet strength, and a heart big enough to carry the world on his shoulders. And she loved him for it. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "You going to stare at me all morning, Sinclair?" Emma smirked, stepping forward and taking the coffee from his hand. "Maybe." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're impossible." She took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. And yet, here we are. Jack exhaled, watching her, then, with a small smile, murmured, "Yeah, here we are." That evening, Jack drove Emma out to the lake. The sun was setting, streaks of orange and violet painting the sky. They sat on the hood of his truck, the cool breeze rustling through the trees. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Jack exhaled. "You still happy here?" Emma turned to him, no hesitation in her voice. "More than I've ever been." A slow smile tugged at his lips. "Good." Before she could ask why he had brought her here, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emma's breath caught. Jack flipped it open, revealing a simple but stunning ring. Elegant, timeless, perfect. Her eyes flicked back up to his, and in that moment she knew. He wasn't just asking her to stay. He was asking her to be his forever. Jack exhaled, his voice steady, filled with the kind of love that didn't demand. It simply was. "Marry me, Emma." Her chest tightened, not because she was unsure, but because she had never been so certain of anything in her life. Tears stung her eyes as she let out a soft laugh. "Took you long enough, Harrison." Jack smirked. "Is that a yes?" Emma swallowed hard, then nodded. "It's a yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she realized something. She had spent her whole life chasing the idea of success. But this was what success really looked like. Love, family, a place to call home, and a man who would stand beside her, no matter what.